the San Francisco Experience podcast. Brought to you by Jim Herlihy. Independent commentary from a Silicon Valley, California perspective for a global audience, featuring newsmakers, thought leaders, and authors. Season 20, Episode 13. Peking to Paris, the Ultimate Motoring Challenge. Talking to Jim Gately. The Peking to Paris motor race began in 1907, but was revived in 1997. For 36 days, over 8,500 miles, across 11 countries and 8 time zones, racers compete in their classic and collectible cars. Our guest today is Jim Gately, who successfully drove his 1937 four-door Cadillac convertible across Asia and Europe in June 2019. He joins us today from his office in Incline Village, Nevada. Hi, Jim, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
Jim, how did you first hear about the Peking to Paris motor race?
I have a friend in Sacramento that did the race 3 years before me, and I had never done a vintage car rally before of any kind. And he was telling me about it and the excitement he had, and it piqued my interest. So I picked up a car and decided to do the 2019 Peking to Paris. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're talking about today.
Okay. Jim, take a moment and explain to our listeners what a motor rally is. I know in Europe, in the UK, in France, Ireland, Germany, motor rallies are very popular. But for the benefit of our audiences in the US and elsewhere, tell us what a motor rally is.
The motor rallies over in Europe, I do the vintage and classic motor rallies, and they're timed endurance. And they're over a prescribed route that goes from country to country or stays in one country, but it'll be a number of days, 3 days, maybe 30 days. Peking to Paris was 34 days, I believe. There's other rallies that are done in Europe, and for instance, the vintage Shamrock, that's 4 days, and that's in Ireland, and it stays in Ireland. So they're timed endurance. And when I say timed endurance, I mean you have to go from point A to point B at an exact time. Let's say it's 3 miles or 30 miles. Mm-hmm. The organizers will go through and calculate how long it should take you going the exact posted speed limits. And if you're like 10 seconds early, you're penalized 10 seconds. If you're 10 seconds late, you're penalized 10 seconds. If you get there on spot on, it's a 0, no penalties at all. So if you go too fast or you go too slow, you're penalized. You have to go the exact speed limit and also estimate for acceleration and deceleration and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's what the timing aspect of it is. The endurance is, even the short rallies, cars don't make it. If the car's not prepared well, it will break. During these rallies, we do tests on racetracks, in cow fields, in parking lots, and that type of stuff. And those are timed for penalty. So the faster you go, the better. Mm-hmm. And they're always off-road.
Now, Jim, let me ask you a question. Before you did the Peking to Paris motor race, had you done another rally before that?
Yes, I had done a number of rallies over in Europe. Basically shorter rallies, 3, 4, and 7 days. I didn't really want to do the longer rallies, but as I got into the shorter rallies, the longer rallies became quite appealing, and so I did enter the Peking to Paris. But I've done many rallies in Europe, in the UK, in the EU, France, Switzerland, all around the Baltic states, Scotland, Ireland, and England.
Jim, tell us about your 1937 Cadillac convertible. I think you've given it a name, Jade, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, to drive any car, 8,500 miles is a feat. but especially an 86-year-old classic car. Tell us about this car, how long you've had it, and what kind of condition it was in when you shipped it over to China.
I first got the car about a year and a half before the rally. I picked up this car specifically for Peking to Paris. So I had a year and a half to work on it, maybe 2 years. And then it was in need of pretty much total restoration. It didn't drive and that type of thing. So took it apart. The engine is original to the car, completely rebuilt the engine. The organizers in the rallies encourage you to put in an overdrive. So we put an overdrive transmission in because if in these older cars, if you're running a 1-to-1 ratio on the engine instead of an overdrive 60%, you will blow your engine up over 8,000 miles. So put overdrive transmission in. The rest of the car, if you look at it, is pretty much original. We modified the exhaust system because we do have deep water crossings, and we raised them up above the back wheels. The engine original, we ran an electric fan, and we switched from 6 volts to 12 volt. That's always encouraged because if you have an electrical problem, nobody has 6 volt systems over there. So put it together and took it on a test rally around the Baltic states. It did well. And then I brought it back to the States after it did the Baltic Classic, took it to a racetrack up at Thunder Hill in Northern California. And I wanted to work the car out. And the weight of the car versus the racetrack didn't work so well. So I went into a slide of the car. Both tires blew. The rims caught the dirt. It flipped over it on its hood, on its top. And then, which I run a roll bar in all my rally cars. So that saved my life. But then I had to rebuild the entire car again. So I've done it twice.
Well, for the benefit of our listeners, the cover art for today's episode is a picture of you at the wheel of your 1937 Cadillac, which we'll call Jade. And it's a beautiful looking car. Who would have known that this had rolled over and gone through all that testing? But Jim, so you're the mechanic in charge. You actually do the work yourself.
I do a lot of the work myself. On the rally, I do 100% of the work myself. Putting the car together, I will utilize shops in Sacramento, for instance, rebuilding the engine. I don't have the ability the lathes and everything to rebuild the engine, so I send that out. The body work and things like that, I don't do. I send that out. So I do sub out the stuff, but on the rally, I am the chief mechanic.
Okay. Now, Jim, tell me, the engine, it was a V8, yes?
Yes, it's a flathead V8 Cadillac engine, and the serial number of the engine matches the frame number. It's the original engine of the car.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, tell me, after you had taken it to the Baltic, brought it back, put it through its paces here in California, then you loaded it on a ship and shipped it to Beijing, China?
Yes. Straight shot across the Pacific. I believe it took about 3 weeks, which is a lot shorter than when I ship a car to London, which has to go through the Panama Canal. So it was actually an easy ship.
Now, tell us, once the car had arrived in Beijing, then you and your wife, you fly to China. Tell us about that aspect of it. You arrive in China. Were there any surprises when you got there to find the car? Did everything work? Was everything in working condition?
I got to China. My wife stayed here. She met us at the end. But I got to China, and then they housed the cars in a warehouse in Beijing, or just outside of Beijing. And then they bus us over there. We get the car, and we drive it back to the hotel. And then that was pretty painless. Chinese people back in 2019 were very friendly. We had a good time there. We went out to restaurants. We worked on the cars, putzied around, that type of thing. So it was actually a wonderful experience, just the first few days, first week in China.
Now, tell me about the organizers of this rally. Who actually organized this particular rally, and what's included in the organization? How do you sign up for this?
The organizers, there's a number of organizers over in the UK and Europe. They do like doing their rallies. This organizer is Hero.
Hero.
They merged. It was Endurance Rally Association.
Yeah.
And then they merged with Hero, Historic Rally Company. And then there's another one, Rally the Globe, which I'm part of. So there's a number of companies, and what they do, they organize the route, they calculate all the timing, they create route books that you have to stick to, and then they arrange for hotels. They arrange for, in Peking to Paris, we did a lot of overnight in tents, I think about 10, 12 days sleeping in tents. They bring in the food, they truck in the gasoline. So they keep everything moving along. So they're responsible for all the logistics. We're responsible going from point A to point B to point C on time. And then we rely on them to arrange for hotels and campgrounds and that type of thing.
How many cars participated, and do you remember how many countries were represented as part of this rally?
There were, I believe, 115 cars on the rally. The countries, I don't recall. There probably were 12 to 15 countries represented. There were a number of crews from the USA, too.
Your car was 1937. It was an 86-year-old. I saw there was one car that was like from 1907 or 1910 or something.
Yes, there was a 1910 steam engine. And that didn't work so well for them. I think they rebuilt that car. They had literally a truck following them to put that car back together almost every night. So that was kind of an experiment that they tried. It didn't really work so well for them. It just didn't work.
Now, let's talk about the route, Jim, because you have these marvelous picture books that you lent to me, so I got a good sense of your participation in the route. But let's talk about at the very first page, it shows all the rally participants at the start line, which is at the Great Wall of China just outside of Beijing. So you set off from the Great Wall of China. Tell us about the route over the next 34 days, the kind of road conditions that you met. Give us a sense of what that route was like when you left the Great Wall of China until you got to the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Tell us about the route.
This route was very fun and exciting, and the countries we went through were fantastic. We left the Great Wall. We went through China, and Chinese roads were pretty good around Peking. And then as we approached Outer Mongolia, turned into rural, little bit dirt, but not bad. And then once we got to Mongolia, it was full on, you're driving in the dirt. You're going from village to village, just like the locals do. Very exciting driving. Can take a tremendous toll on the car if you don't do it right. So you go through Mongolia, and then you dip up into Siberia, into Russia. And pretty much most of the Russian roads in Siberia were inferior to the dirt roads in Mongolia.
Oh, my God.
The potholes would eat a Volkswagen.
Right.
Crazy roads in Siberia. So he'd spent a little stint in Siberia and then coming down into Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has pretty good roads, but we did a lot of dirt roads again, just like Mongolia. The villagers go from their village to the neighboring village to do whatever they do. And it's pretty much dirt roads. So you have to kind of follow where they go and pay attention to what they do because they know the roads. And then there's a city, the capital of Kazakhstan, it was at the time we went through there, it was Astana. I believe its name is changed now. The city is so modern, you would think you were in the United States or Canada.
Really?
It's an amazing city. One of the skyscrapers there was an actual billboard, and it would light up at night and do advertisements. A fantastic city. And so we leave Kazakhstan. Now we're into Western Russia, and we're headed towards St. Petersburg. That's where we spent a night, a really nice hotel. And it was a compound outside of St. Petersburg that I guess Putin stays at with his buddies and they do Putin things or whatever they do there. But that was an interesting stay. And then we came up, left St. Petersburg, went up to Finland, one of the Baltic states, and then we take the roads there. Now all our roads, once we hit Western Russia, you're in good roads. You don't have to worry about potholes. You don't have to worry about dirt. It's just driving now. So it's pretty easy in terms of that. And then we take a ferry from Finland to Estonia, and we're going through the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and then down Germany and into France. And all that is basically easy driving because the roads were so good. So if you took care of your car on the eastern part of this rally through Mongolia and Kazakhstan, you will make it the whole way. Mm-hmm. If you're rough on your car, you're not going to make it. You're going to be on a tow truck going to a shop.
Jim, tell me about the gasoline. Of course, here in the United States, we use unleaded gasoline. Western Europe also uses unleaded gasoline. How did you deal with gasoline in China, Russia, Kazakhstan? Is it the same grade gasoline that you'd find here in the U.S. or Europe, or is it different?
It turns out, and I don't know the grades because their numbering systems are different. Sometimes you can't even read the numbers. But it turns out we had no problems whatsoever with the gasoline quality back there. And the organizers instruct you to put 2 fuel tanks in your car, separately hooked up, and never fill up both tanks at the same place. So in case you do get bad gas in one place, you have another tank that has good gas. Uh-huh. So, but we had no problem whatsoever with gasoline on the whole route.
Now, Jim, of course, being the mechanic and being as familiar with the car before you took it to China, obviously that gave you a huge advantage. But tell us during this 34-day period, because I saw some pictures of you working on the car, taking the wheels off, and you're kind of halfway hidden inside the car as you're trying to piece it back together again. Tell us about some of the things that went wrong with Jade on this trip. And did you bring spare parts with you, or did you have to improvise en route?
We had several problems that we were very, very lucky with, because all our problems were at a time where I could fix the car. Uh-huh. For instance, at night, whatever. So the first problem we encountered was in China. We had a massive oil leak, and it wasn't a leak like out of a gasket. See, the 37 Cadillac engine doesn't have a rear main seal on the crankshaft. It has a slinger which shoots the oil back into the engine. And so we were losing 12 to 15 quarts a day in the first few days.
Oh, my God.
And we could not do the rally if that kept up. So while still in China, I believe on the third day, I pulled the bottom of the engine apart and the main bearing caps off. Didn't see anything obviously wrong, but I felt that the oil was getting past the rear main bearing housing. Uh-huh. So I took some aircraft siliconed up the rubber seals on the sides of this bearing cap, put it back together, crossed my fingers, and the next day we only lost 3 quarts of oil. So that was a go. So I could handle 3 quarts of oil a day loss. Uh-huh. I can't handle 12. So that was the first problem right out of the gate. Yeah. That should have been addressed before the car ever left the shop in Sacramento. Uh-huh. Another problem we had was because this engine block is so old, a lot of rust chunks will fall off and go to the radiator. And being that I had Cadillacs like this year, I'm aware of that. So I put filters in the return radiator hoses. Uh-huh. Well, there was so much chunks of metal flaking off, it would block the hoses and overheat the engine. So about every other day, I would just take the radiator hoses apart and clean out the filters. That solved that problem. So now I have 2 major problems solved. We were doing a test another time, and this was in Kazakhstan, and it was on a dirt mountainous wilderness area. And the fuel delivery system, we use electric fuel pumps as opposed to mechanical. We blew a relay, or the relay shorted out, and I couldn't get it fixed. So we flunked the test because I couldn't get the car started at the line. It basically ran out of gas, even though the tanks were full. So I ended up hot wiring the fuel pump directly from the battery because the battery was in the trunk too. So that fixed that problem. But now we're doing the test and we're hitting bumps that are so hard, my shifter breaks off in the hand. So
Oh my God.
I'm driving with a 1 inch of shifter lever the rest of the day, and then I found we stopped at Astana that night and in Kazakhstan, and then I had that welded up. And then the only other problem we had was we disintegrated a rear wheel bearing driving through Russia, and this was from bent the housing of the axle a little bit, and so it kind of fried the bearing. But I carry spares. I had that replaced in about 15 minutes on the side of the road. So in terms of nightmares of driving 37 Cadillac from there to there, it wasn't so bad.
But of course, you say that as a really seasoned and experienced mechanic. I mean, for a layperson, I mean, any one of those problems that you just mentioned probably would have disqualified a regular participant, right? I mean, the fact that you were so skilled a mechanic.
It definitely could have. The only trouble I had was when I took the bottom of the engine apart, the torque specs for the main bearing cap are 125 foot-pounds. And I really got a strain to get that.
Uh-huh. Now, Jim, every morning you would get your map and your instructions. Now, tell us, you were driving, but you had a navigator. So every driver has a navigator. Tell us about your navigator. What's the role of the navigator? And you've got to operate as a team, right? The driver and the navigator. Tell us about that relationship and when you get your map and your instructions, et cetera, because I guess you're really dependent on the navigator. You're doing the driving, but the navigator's telling you to turn left, turn right, et cetera, right?
That's correct. And teamwork is really key here. Tony Brooks was my navigator on this rally, and we've done a number of rallies over in Europe and the UK, probably 10 of them. And we have a good relationship between us. I always do the driving. He always does the navigating. Some crews switch back and forth. That doesn't work so good for us simply because I don't know how to navigate. But but it works really well for us. We've won probably 4 rallies around the world in one of my cars, just because we do get along so well. But then in the mornings, we'll get the map book, the route book, and any changes to it, supplements, that type of thing. He'll go and study. I'll go to the car. I'll check the air pressure, the oil, that type of thing. He's studying the route book. He's studying the maps. We have breakfast. We hop in the car. We go. We have a routine all set up between us. It works very well.
So, Jim, because of the precision between point A and point B for that particular day, if you go too fast, you get dinged. If you go too slow, you get dinged. So, again, this is a precision endurance test. Anytime that your navigator says turn left, turn right, slow down, whatever, I mean, you've got to have maximum confidence in your navigator, right? I mean, you can't second guess him, I guess.
That's correct. And I don't second guess him, but I can tell when he's hesitant. When he's hesitant, it's better that I go slower or come to a stop till he figures out what we're doing or where we're at. That works best instead of going down the road a quarter of a mile and finding out I have to turn around and go back because we missed a left turn. So it's better that I sense that he's uneasy, he needs a little time. So I basically stop the car. And what Tony says in terms of penalty points and things, he says getting a zero penalties is pure luck. Getting 1 second or 2 second penalties is skill.
Uh-huh. Oh, that's interesting. Now tell me, some days you'd have to drive 400 miles and some days maybe 200 miles or less. That's a hell of a lot to drive 400 miles in one day here in California, for instance, from San Francisco to LA is about 450 miles. I've done that. You've done it. We've all done it. But I've done it once. I mean, I'll do it one day and I get to LA and then I've arrived. I don't get back in the car and drive another 400 miles and the next day another 400 miles. How were you? I mean, that takes a lot of self-discipline, I would think, to every single day for 34 days to be driving these long distances. How did you keep from getting bored? How did you motivate yourself? I guess you and Tony, did you have conversations, or Tony really had to concentrate on the maps to keep you on track?
We would have limited conversations because Tony does have to concentrate on the books and the trip meters and that type of thing, which is on his side of the car. And I like to concentrate on the road. So we do talk a bit, but not much. But it's not as bad as you think. Once you get into the saddle, so to speak, it's just a routine. I mean, 400 miles in a day is basically going to be an easy day because 400 miles, it's going to be pretty much good roads. You're in overdrive gear. You're cruising along. If it's a 225 mile day, you know you're in for a rough day. You're going to be climbing mountains. It's probably going to be raining or snowing. There's no road over the mountain. You're in the dirt. So you know you're going to have issues. And in terms of boredom and things like that, being that we're in a different part of the world that we've never seen before, there's never a dull moment. You're looking at stuff. You're looking at the locals herding sheep. You're trying to avoid sheep. You have to pay attention. So it's hard to really grasp it unless you do it. But there's really little boredom, if any, on the long rallies, and absolutely no chance of boredom on like a 3 or 4 day rally.
Now, in looking at the pictures in the books that you gave me, I mean, the scenery looks fantastic. Mountains, the Gobi Desert, going through rivers and through forests, etc. I mean, the scenery looked fantastic. So I guess that would have distracted you, and you could have enjoyed that as you were driving 200 or 400 miles, I guess.
It can, but you're still seeing stuff. I call it viewing the world through a windshield. Mm-hmm. So you're just cruising along. You have to pay attention to the road conditions, especially if you're in Mongolia, Kazakhstan, or Siberia, because one wrong pothole will rip out the whole left front suspension of your car. So you have to be very careful of that. So you do have to be on your toes. Time flies as fast as you can believe. It's unbelievably fast. So you finish the day, you might be tired, especially if the sun's out. But when you get in, I mean, you had a busy day, even though you drove 400 miles.
So, Jim, typical day. You drive your 400 miles, you get to your destination, and you said that sometimes you were staying in tents that the organizers had organized for all of the 115 participants. Once you got to your encampment, what did you do? I take a shower, have dinner, check the car. I mean, what was your routine every day when you'd get to your destination?
The routine is, well, the organizers didn't set up your tents. You brought your tent, you set it up. So the first thing Tony and I would do would set up our home base. We would go with a group of people that we hang out with. We kind of like circle the wagons. We set up our own tents, sleeping bags, that type of thing. Once that is done, then we'll go have a beer, or somebody goes and gets a beer. And then I check out the car. Tony looks at whatever he needs to look at. And then we have dinner in the camping end of the world where there's no restaurants. The organizers would bring in a dinner tent, set it up. They would serve food in there, and the food was absolutely great. They brought beer. They brought wine. It was absolutely perfect. And so that's pretty much what we would do. And if I needed to work on the car more, Tony would bring me dinner out to the car as I'm working on it.
Now, Jim, when you were out there in the tents, what did you do for showers and bathrooms and stuff like that?
They have those provided too. There was a group from Mongolia that followed us through Mongolia and Kazakhstan called the Nomads. That's the name of the company. And they would have portable bathrooms. They would just dig a hole, put the shack on top of the hole, and then that was the bathroom. They had shower tents set up, and you could actually take a shower out in the middle of the desert.
Uh-huh.
And so it was all the little creature comforts kind of follow you, and that's part of the organizer's duties.
I see. Now, at the end of each day, of course, each day at the beginning of the day, you're all starting together. You're going to the same destination. So at the end of that day, did you know who the winner of that particular segment that day was at the end of the day once you arrived at your encampment?
We would get postings on a announcement board where the everybody's position is in the classes, that type of thing. So after a few hours after we get in, they would post it on the board, and everything's electronic. We have electronic trackers of the car in case we get lost. They can send out a search party, and all the stuff is called in from the checkpoints that are physically manned by a person. And so at end of each day, we'll know we're second in class, 10th overall. We'll know our exact position every single day.
Now, Jim, of course, over a 34-day period, you're with your navigator, you're camping out, you're being challenged. What was your high point of this 34-day endurance test? And what was your low point?
The high point was driving into Paris.
Yes, I'd imagine.
My wife was there. My kids were there. That was the high point. That was fantastic.
Uh-huh.
We had a great time there. We had a dinner at a hotel. Everything was fancy. I wore my kilt.
I saw that. Congratulations.
Thank you. So that was, without a doubt, that was the high point. The low point was when we were, I believe, in second place, probably fifth overall. We had the issue with the relay and the fuel tanks and the shifter breaking off all at once.
Oh,
So that was pretty much the low point, because that was at a bad time. It wasn't like when my axle bearing broke in Russia on a road, which I can fix in 15 minutes and go. This was at the start of a test going through a mountainous field, and it ran out of gas because the fuel pump lost electricity because something shorted out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very disappointing. We plummeted down the rankings after that one.
Now tell me, you're a pretty fit guy, but for 34 days, you're basically in the car and camping. Were you able to get in any kind of exercise apart from sitting in the car and driving and being focused on the road? Were you able to do any kind of calisthenics or exercise or walking or anything like that?
My exercise consisted of walking back and forth to the car to work on it. That was pretty much it. It didn't affect either me or Tony. We had a good time on very, very hot days, not necessarily on this rally, but we did a rally across the United States also. Going through the desert, we actually had to put our convertible top up to keep the sun off us. Wow. The rain doesn't bother us because if we can maintain speed, I don't care how much it's raining, it flies over the car. We don't need the top. It's when you come to a red light that's a problem. But we didn't really have any issues in terms of fitness and that type of thing. You still move around even though you're sedentary in a car, for maybe 8-10 hours every day.
Uh-huh. How did the weather cooperate during the 34 days? Because you're going from Beijing, China, through Mongolia, the Gobi Desert, Siberia, the stands. What was the weather like for the 34 days? Because you're going right across Asia and right across Europe.
We had everything. We had sun, we had clouds, we had snow, we had rain, we had lightning and thunder. You name it, we had it.
Now, Jim, of course, 2023, of course, you did this in 2019. 2022 was supposed to be the next one, but that was canceled because of COVID. That was going to be extended to 2023, but of course, with the situation with Russia and the sanctions, I guess that has been called off. What is the current status of the Peking to Paris race? When is the next one, and what will the route look like?
My understanding, I'm not going to be a participant on this one. I'm doing another long distance rally. But my understanding is it will start at Beijing again, or Peking, and it's going to go not in Russia. So it'll go through Mongolia Kazakhstan, between the two countries back into China, and then it's going to go through Turkey and a number of the stands, and then go across, come up Italy, and enter Paris from that direction. So they did have to do a massive route change from what I understand, what they planned. What we're going to do, Tony and I, we're going to do a long distance endurance rally marathon from Anchorage to Cabo down in Mexico. We're doing that one in August, September of this year, and we're using Jade again.
And how many miles is that, Jim?
That's about 9,000 miles.
And how many days?
30 days.
30 days. And again, it will be similarly organized as the Peking to Paris?
It'll be Rally the Globe, which is a competitor, and it will be similarly organized. There won't be any tent camping, however, because they have hotels on the way through Alaska, Canada, coming down through the States, and then into Mexico. So it'll all be hotels and that type of thing.
So I guess you'll be traveling Route 5 when you're in the Western, is that right? Or what will your route be through the Western U.S.?
It'll be coming down through Moab. So we're going to come down through the Dakotas into the mountain states down in there, Utah, and down to Palm Springs and crossing at Mexicali into Mexico.
Wow.
So we stay out of the bulk of California. We're not coming down I-5.
Okay. I was going to say, that would have been easy. That would have been too easy, right?
That would have been too easy. They'd like to take us through crazy mountain passes and things.
That's exciting. Now, you have another rally coming up in Ireland. Tell us about that, Jim.
This one is called the Vintage Shamrock, and the organizers in this rally are my company, Rally the Globe, and Irish Racing Green. And that will be in Southern Ireland, starting out in County Waterford and ending up in Cork, staying in the southern portion, but going through mountains and that type of stuff. It's a 4-day rally, and it will be in 2 hotels. So the first 2 nights will be in one hotel, and then you bring your luggage over to the second hotel and finish the rally there.
Jim, I think as you may know, San Francisco and Cork are sister cities. What day do you plan to arrive in Cork, Ireland?
We will be in Cork, Ireland, the 10th and 11th
of May.
Of May, yes, May. Sorry.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that offline. Tell us about your company, Rally the Globe. What do they do? And give us the website reference for it.
Rally the Globe website is rallytheglobe.com. And it's an exciting company. It's been in business for about 4 years now. There's 7 of us that are the founding members. And very exciting company. It has massive experience in the executive level. And they put on several types of rallies. They do the marathon rally, for instance, what I mentioned before, Anchorage to Cabo. They'll do the shorter rallies. The Vintage Shamrock is an example of the shorter rally, and they'll do what they call Carrera rallies. And I did one with my wife, Dawn, in Spain and Portugal. And those are you're staying at pretty much 5-star hotels, very nice dinners. You'll do wine tasting and that type of thing. And the roads are generally non-gravel, good asphalt roads, so you can take in the classic division, you can take your Porsche and that type of stuff. Very exciting rallies they have. They've done Italy, they've done Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, that type of thing. So they're really fun. And so that's what they put on, and very exciting, really fun stuff.
Jim, for any of our listeners who might be interested in participating in one of these rallies, once again, give us the website for Rally the Globe, please.
Rally the Globe is RALLYTHEGLOBE.com. Let me say one thing. I was into cars a lot through my life, whether it's hot rods, classic cars, that type of thing. But you eventually, and I even have a car first in class Pebble Beach, but you get burned out on car shows. You want to use your cars more. And this is a fantastic way to do it. And you're meeting people literally from all over the world, like-minded, just like you are. You'll be racing against Bentleys, Morgans, whatever. And it's really a lot of fun.
And Jim, closing thoughts for our listeners, are there any rallies, say, for instance, here in California or Nevada, for instance, are there any rallies locally that a first-time rally participant might look a little closer to home?
There's a California Mille Miglia, which is a rally / tour, and there's several in California. They're not hardcore rallies like I do in the UK and the EU, but they're still fun. I've not done one there, but I've talked to people that have done it. And there's a Copper Classic down in Arizona that's a little more on the hardcore side to get the adrenaline junkies going.
And Jim, our listeners could get some information on those rallies if they go to Rally the Globe?
Rally the Globe will have their rallies, which are, bulk of them are on
Overseas.
the other side of the world. But Alaska to Cabo is a local one. And that's not a bad one for somebody new because it's not as intense in the navigational aspect as it is in the marathon endurance aspect.
And Jim, if the listeners go to Rally the Globe website, there'll be lots of pictures there of some of the rallies that you've participated in, and they'll be able to see you and your cars and the other participants?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, they'll be all there. And the cars that everybody brings on those rallies are fantastic.
And also for our listeners, if you go to the website for the San Francisco Experience podcast, click on the blog option and go to the first blog post. The first blog post, in fact, that we posted about 2 weeks ago has lots of pictures of Jim, the travels across Asia and Europe, the Peking to Paris rally, as well as pictures of Jade, famous Jade. So, Jim, Jim, we really appreciate you being with us today and sharing your adventure of a lifetime. Any closing thoughts for our listeners as we close for the day?
Well, I would suggest people to look at it, especially the gearheads that are a little bit bored with car shows and things, because it is an exciting element to use your car and get around and see the world. And it's actually very, very fun, and you meet people from all over. It's really a great next step in classic car ownership.
Well, Jim, once again, thanks so much for joining us today, sharing your adventure from Peking to Paris and updating us on Rally the Globe, your company that organizes these rallies around the world. Again, thank you. And for our listeners, make sure you check out the cover art of today's podcast because you'll see a picture of Jade with Jim Gately at the steering wheel. Thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you very much, Jim.
My pleasure. And for our listeners, today's episode is number 398 as the San Francisco Experience continues to mark our 3rd anniversary. Listen to us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, 19 platforms in total. And join our audience that spans 65 countries by subscribing to the podcast. This has been the San Francisco Experience with host Jim Herlihy coming to you from San Francisco.